Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. She came to Thanksgiving dinner carrying a bottle of wine she didn't buy and a smile she'd been practicing in the car. I noticed the smile first. I've been reading people for 40 years, first as a structural engineer, then as a project manager overseeing contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. I know what a load-bearing wall looks like, and I know what a load-bearing lie looks like. Stephanie had walked through my front door 6 times over 8 months, and every single time, that smile arrived half a second too late, like she had to remind herself to turn it on. My son, Marcus, had been with her since February. He was 34, a software architect, sharp in every way that mattered except, apparently, this one. He'd called me in October and said, "Dad, I think she might be the one." I told him I was happy for him. I didn't tell him about the smile. My house sits on 4 acres outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. There's the main house, 3 bedrooms, the kitchen his mother redesigned before she passed, and then there's the lake house down the slope, about 200 yards through the trees. His mother and I built it together the summer Marcus turned 12. We rented it out for 3 months a year and kept it dark the rest of the time, just for us. After she died, I kept renting it. Couldn't bring myself to change much. The appraiser told me last spring it was worth somewhere around $820,000. I hadn't asked him to come out. He was a friend of a friend. I mentioned it to no one. Thanksgiving that year was me, Marcus, my neighbor Dale, who always brought sweet potato, casserole, and Stephanie. She'd told Marcus her own family was scattered mother in Tampa, father out of the picture. Marcus had relayed this with the particular tenderness of a man who wanted me to feel sorry for her. I did feel sorry for someone in that situation. I wasn't sure it was her. She sat across from me at the table in a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my first car payment. She complimented my cooking twice before she'd taken a single bite. She called me Richard when every other time she'd called me Mr. Holt. Small things. The kind of things you file away in a drawer and try not to think about too much. We got through the soup. We got through the salad. Dale was telling a story about his grandson and a riding lawnmower, and everyone was laughing, including me. And I looked over at Marcus and caught him for just a fraction of a second not laughing, just watching Stephanie. There was something careful in his eyes. Something that looked like a man who has realized he is standing on ice and is trying very hard not to move. He felt me looking. He turned, met my eyes, and then he did something we hadn't done since he was about 14 years old. He pressed his knee against mine under the table. Twice. Slow. Deliberate. When he was a boy and his mother and I would take him to church, or to long dinners with boring adults, we had a system. 2 knee taps meant, "I need to talk to you alone." It was our code. His mother knew about it. No one else ever did. I looked at my plate. I took a slow breath. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, and said, "Marcus, would you mind helping me check on the pie? I think I may have left the oven on low." He was up before I finished the sentence. We stood in the kitchen, with the door pulled almost shut, voices down, the sound of Dale still talking, drifting in from the dining room. "Tell me," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he's done since he was 8 years old when something was eating at him. "Dad, I found something on her laptop 2 weeks ago." I wasn't snooping. She left it open on the coffee table, and I walked by and saw my address on the screen. "Your address and the lake house." I waited. She had a document open. It looked like notes from a meeting with a real estate attorney. It had the estimated value of the property, the rental income history, and a note, I'm reading this as close as I can remember it, that said, "Transfer via marital asset after 12 months. "Dad, we've been together 8 months." The kitchen was very quiet. "Is there more?" I asked. He looked at the floor. The $40,000 I gave her in March and June. She told me her mom had a heart condition, that there were surgical bills piling up. She sent me photos of medical invoices. I wired it in 2 installments. "Have you spoken to her mother?" "I called her mother last week," he said. "Her mother is perfectly fine, lives in a condo in Tampa with her boyfriend, goes to water aerobics on Tuesdays and Thursdays." She had no idea what I was talking about. I looked at my son for a long moment. He looked like he was waiting to be told he'd done something wrong. He hadn't. He'd been deceived by someone who was very good at deceiving people. That is not the same thing. "How long have you known?" I said. 2 weeks. Why didn't you call me? He finally looked up. Because I didn't know what to do. And because he stopped, jaw tight because I was embarrassed. I put my hand on his shoulder. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. Do you understand me? Not one thing. He nodded. He was trying very hard to hold his face together. Go back in there, I said. Finish dinner. Be normal. Can you do that? Yes. Good. Because I need about 20 minutes with you after she leaves, and I need to make a phone call tonight. But right now I need you to go back in there and eat your turkey and laugh at Dale's story about the lawnmower. He almost smiled. You were listening? I was listening. He went back to the dining room. I stood in the kitchen for another 2 minutes. I thought about my wife and what she would have said. She would have been furious and calm in equal parts, the way she always was, the way I always tried to be. Then I thought about what I already knew that Marcus didn't know I knew. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I'd had coffee with my old friend Gerald. Gerald is a real estate attorney in Knoxville and one of the sharpest minds I've ever sat across a table from. He'd called me out of the blue in late October and said, Richard, I had a woman in my office last week asking about a property registered under your name out on Lakeside Drive. I don't usually make calls like this, but something about it felt off to me. I told her I couldn't help her and sent her on her way. Thought you should know. I'd asked him to describe her. He described Stephanie. I thanked him. I told him I might need his help shortly. He said call whenever. I didn't tell Marcus any of this because I didn't yet know the full shape of what I was dealing with. Now I did. Dinner finished quietly. Stephanie talked about a trip she wanted to take, she and Marcus, possibly a cruise. She'd been looking at itineraries. The Mediterranean in spring was supposed to be spectacular. She looked at me once while she was describing it. A particular kind of look. The kind that asks a question without asking it out loud. I smiled pleasantly and refilled Dale's glass. She and Marcus helped clear the plates. She was very helpful, very warm, very everything. Dale thought she was wonderful. He told me so on his way out, quietly, while Marcus and Stephanie were still inside. She seems like a keeper, Richard. I thanked him for the casserole. After Stephanie left, Marcus and I sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I told him what Gerald had told me. I watched the color leave his face and come back changed. We talked through everything, the $40,000, the real estate documents, the medical invoices, the timeline of 8 months. At one point he said, I feel like an idiot. I told him what I'd told him before. Deceiving people is a skill that some people develop and spend years perfecting. Being deceived by a professional does not make you a fool. It makes you a target. Before he left that night, I asked him one question. Do you want me to handle this? He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, yes. Over the next 10 days, I did 3 things. First, I called Gerald and asked him to pull together everything he could about any legal inquiry made regarding my property. He called back within 48 hours. There had been 2 separate consultation meetings, not just one, at 2 different firms in Knoxville. She'd been thorough. Second, I called a private investigator named Louis, who I'd worked with years ago during a contract dispute that had gotten ugly. Louis was quiet, methodical, and discreet. I gave him Stephanie's name and asked him to find out what he could about her background. He came back to me in a week. What he found was not small. Stephanie had done versions of this before. Not identical, she wasn't stupid, but recognizable. 3 years prior, in Nashville, she'd been engaged to a man whose father owned commercial real estate. The engagement ended abruptly. The man's family had lost approximately $60,000 in what was described as a shared investment in a restaurant that never opened. No charges were filed. Before that, in Atlanta, there was a civil suit quietly settled, involving a disputed loan of $22,000 and a lease agreement that had somehow ended up in her name for 6 months before being contested. She had a pattern. She found men in their 30s, stable, established, slightly lonely, or freshly optimistic. She found families with assets. She moved carefully, invested the time, kept it just legal enough to avoid criminal exposure while the money transferred. The lake house wasn't the end goal. It was the centerpiece. Get on the deed through marriage, wait the required period, then either sell or leverage. The $40,000 from Marcus was operating capital. She'd done it before. I sat with all of this for one evening. Then I called Marcus. I need you to invite her for dinner, I said. Next Saturday. Here, just the three of us. Tell her I want to get to know her better. Tell her I've been thinking about the future. There was a pause on his end. She'll think, I know what she'll think, I said. That's exactly what I want her to think. She arrived on Saturday looking like a woman who had just received the news she'd been waiting for. She wore burgundy. She brought wine again, this time something more expensive. She kissed my cheek at the door and said it was so good of me to do this, that she'd been hoping we'd have more time, just the three of us, to really talk. I told her I'd been thinking the same thing. We had dinner. I cooked pot roast, his mother's recipe. Stephanie ate with the careful appreciation of someone performing appreciation. She told me 3 times that it was the best pot roast she'd ever had. Marcus was quiet. He was doing well, better than I expected. He watched her the way I'd taught him to watch a structural plan when you suspect there's an error. Look patient. Don't react. Find the line where it doesn't hold. After dinner, I poured coffee and suggested we move to the study. My study is a small room off the hallway. Bookshelves, my old drafting table, 2 chairs across from the desk. On the desk that evening was a manila folder. On the credenza behind me, my laptop was open. She sat down in one of the chairs. Marcus sat in the other. I sat behind the desk. I've been thinking about the future, I said. Marcus tells me things are getting serious. I want to make sure everyone is on the same page. She smiled. I think that's wonderful. I feel the same way. Good, I said. Then let's talk openly. I opened the manila folder. I slid the first page across the desk to her. This is a summary of a meeting you had with a real estate attorney on October the 14th at a firm on West Main Street in Knoxville. The meeting concerned my property on Lakeside Drive. She looked at the paper. She didn't pick it up. There was a second meeting, I said, on October 28th, at a different firm. Gerald was kind enough to compile the records. I slid the second page across. I believe you were quoted an estimate for expediting a marital property transfer. The smile was gone. Something else had replaced it, a very still, very controlled expression that told me exactly how many times she'd needed to use it before. And this, I said, sliding a third sheet, is a summary of a civil suit in Fulton County, Georgia, from 4 years ago. And this is a record from Davidson County, Tennessee, 3 years ago, involving a gentleman named Paul Delaney and his family, and approximately $60,000. She said nothing. She was calculating. I could almost hear it. I also spoke with your mother, I said. Margaret. She was lovely, very healthy. Mentioned she hadn't heard from you in some time. She seemed surprised to learn you'd been telling people she had a heart condition. Across from me, Marcus was very still. I leaned back in my chair. I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer me honestly because I think, at this point, you understand that I already know the answers to the questions I'm about to ask. She said nothing. The $40,000 you took from my son, I said, in 2 wire transfers in March and June. What was it for? A long silence. Then, those were loans. Between Marcus and me. That's a private matter. It was a private matter, I said. It is now a matter for the Knox County Sheriff's Office. Because I turned the laptop on the credenza so the screen faced her, my friend Lewis, who compiled the background information I mentioned, has also been in contact with a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. They've been building a case. The pattern across multiple counties, across multiple victims, that changes the charge from civil dispute to criminal fraud. On the laptop screen, a video call was open. Gerald was there, and next to him was someone in a collared shirt with a badge on a lanyard around his neck. He nodded at me. I nodded back. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. For just a moment, the performance dropped completely. What was underneath it was not what I expected. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something more exhausted than either of those. Like a person who has been running for a very long time and has just looked behind them. The detective will want to speak with Marcus directly, Gerald said from the screen. And with you, miss. Tonight, if possible, or we can schedule it formally. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked at Marcus. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who has grieved something and arrived, quietly, on the other side of it. He said, simply, "Why?" She didn't answer him. 2 officers arrived at my door 18 minutes later. I'd made the call earlier in the week to ensure the timing. She was not arrested that evening. The formal charges came later, but she was taken in for questioning, and by the time March arrived, the case had grown considerably. Louie's research had connected her pattern to a third victim in Chattanooga who had never filed a formal report but was willing, once contacted, to do so. The fraud charges accumulated the way they do when someone has been at it for a while. Each individual case is a thread. Pull enough of them together, and what you have is rope. She was convicted 11 months later on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of obtaining property by deception. The $40,000 Marcus had wired was not fully recovered. $23,000 came back through seized assets. He called me the night the verdict came in and didn't say much, just sat on the phone for a little while. That was fine. Sometimes that's what's needed. The lake house is still mine, still standing on its slope through the trees, just the way his mother left it, just the way I left it. I rent it out 3 months a year. I keep it dark the rest of the time. Last Thanksgiving, it was just Marcus and Dale and me. And Dale brought the sweet potato casserole again. And at some point after dinner, Marcus and I walked down the path through the trees and stood at the water's edge for a while without saying anything in particular. He said, "I should have seen it sooner." I said, "She was good at her job." He thought about that. "How did you know?" "Before I told you anything." "How did you know?" "The smile," I said. "It always came a half-second too late." He shook his head slowly. Then he said, "Thanks, Dad." I told him that was what I was there for. Then we walked back up through the trees to where Dale was waiting, and we had pie, and the evening was ordinary, and good in the way that ordinary and good evenings are, which is something you only truly understand once you've stood at the edge of losing them. A con is not a crime of intelligence. It is a crime of patience. The people who do this count on the fact that love makes you lower your guard, that trust makes you stop asking questions, that the desire to believe the best about someone will do the work for them. They are not wrong that these things happen. What they miscalculate is that some of us have been in the business of finding hidden weaknesses in things that look solid for a very long time. I spent 40 years as an engineer. My job was to look at a structure that seemed perfectly fine and find the place where it would fail before it failed. Some habits, once built, don't leave you. If you're watching this and something in your gut is telling you something is wrong, trust that. Not every instinct is fear. Some of them are knowledge you haven't had time to name yet. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'll be reading them. And stay close, because the next story is one I've been sitting with for a while, and it is something else entirely.